Now, the second part of this video is on general. Okay, Three Stooges clock interrupted me. This is important, but a little more subtle. Cultural values. Now, obviously, if we have different cultures, they're going to have things that are more important in one culture than another. It's not a matter of right or wrong, but it's a matter of practices. Now, I do believe in right and wrong, but each culture may have very different concepts. Obviously, some cultures, they have the death penalty. Other cultures are very almost kind toward convicted criminals and do not punish people harshly. But this extends to every aspect of life. One of the best ones, the one that starts out is that every culture has a set of values, and usually almost everybody buys into them, but some people don't. And if you were to think of American culture right now, depending on what you think the American cultural values are, it's going to be scattered. You're going to have people that say, I have a right to carry a gun, I can be in the militia, I can defend against rioters, even if I'm not a cop. That's the most extreme that way. You have others this way, say, I want to have a gun in my house to protect myself. Other than that, I'm not going to get involved being a cop. Then you got people over here that think guns are just bad, period, and you should never have a gun in your house. And it won't be used, it'll never be used the way you think it will be. So you got this scattering, and that's why on some of these I have, well, some of them like this one, I have these little bubbles going across here, you know. So values may be all shared in one group and everybody's at this end or in the middle or wherever they are, but sometimes they're just like everywhere. Individual versus collectivism. This is at the heart of a lot of politics. Should the individual predominate, or should the, if we want to call it the government, or we want to call it whatever we want to call it, maybe a church or something, should they be in charge of a lot of decisions individuals make? We talk about our rugged individualism, and depends on what you mean by that. Sometimes it can be pretty rugged and violent. Other times it can be very critical for the character of a people. Do you believe that you have to take care of yourself, or do you believe that it's good to have the government help you with things like Social Security, or if you have a tornado or a flood or a hurricane, that the government participates and helps? This decision, what we're talking about now, I'm talking about the United States, but it's made in every country. Some countries, the government does nothing for you. In other countries, the government does a tremendous amount for you. And of course, it's not as simple as the way we put it sometimes. Sometimes they put the emphasis on the individual with some assistance. Okay, now one of the big ones I think is small power, large power. Now, what does that mean? It means that if I'm in a country that's large power, I believe in the authority of the central government, the president or the prime minister is going to do the right thing and help me. And that I'm going to support him and I'm not going to object to central government. Now we have kind of the opposite in the United States. But a lot of countries, because of the way they've grown up, they just have a central dictator, authoritarian figure. And he's been in power a long time. And if you oppose him, you go to jail. So that's one of the issues, you know. Theoretically, in the United States, you oppose him, you don't go to jail just because you oppose him. But that's where you have to have government and laws and rules. Otherwise, whoever's in charge can do whatever they want. In the US, we believe, theoretically, we believe individuals vote and have the authority, and we collectively make the decision at the lower level. But of course, in some cultures, I won't name countries because it might be considered offensive, but in some cultures, if you're born at the bottom of the social class, you stay there. You don't ever get out of that. So that's not very mobile. So that's another issue. Can you go from poor to rich? Can you go from lower class to upper class? Does it work even? Or are you stuck permanently at the bottom if you're poor? High context and low context. Well, low context is a culture where the rules are already written all over the place and you can read them and figure out what you need to do. High context is when you go somewhere and you realize there's no written rules telling you what to do, but you know there's a lot of rules that you don't know. Japan is often given as an example of a high context culture. Japanese growing up in Japan know all kinds of rules, but an American coming to visit and trying to learn to live in Japan, they don't know the rules. They don't know the language a lot of times, and it's even harder to figure out, do I bow? Am I allowed to shake hands? Can male and female, can they physically touch by shaking hands, or is that considered offensive? What about eye contact? Even things like eye contact. You do not stare at people in other cultures. In some cultures, it's very offensive. So if you go someplace and you just stare at somebody and say, well, that's a beautiful girl or guy or something, and you're looking at them all the time, they actually get very angry about it. And if you don't know that rule, then it's high context, which means you need to know that rule and you need to find out these things. What I do a lot of times in those situations, I spend a lot of time studying what are the rules, nonverbal rules. What are the rules that I might most likely break if I go to that culture? A lot of times Europeans don't like Americans because we like to talk about, well, what do you do for a living? And that's considered offensive. You don't just start out asking what your work is, because in some cultures, you're not defined by your work. Now, we happen to think that your work is what you are very strongly, but that's not always true, and it can lead to conflict. Here's another one, man-nature relationship. Does the culture believe they control nature and they can ignore bad weather? Because the only time we give into nature in the United States is when we're facing a hurricane or a tornado, and we still try to prepare for it. But especially tornadoes, we don't know much about them. They just destroy things and we build back up. But in some cultures where they have monsoons or they have regional storms, the whole culture is designed around the storms. It's designed around having a desert life. Everything in the desert has to be, you have to make sure you're careful to preserve food and especially water. And you have certain animals like camels, or you have machines and air conditioners if you can afford them to deal with it. What about poor people in the United States? A lot of times people say, well, we're going to buy a fan for that family. We can't buy them air conditioning. It's too expensive, but we'll get them a fan. And so an air conditioner sometimes might make the difference for an elderly person or someone who's ill. But a lot of times people will buy a fan saying, well, at least the air is moving. So that's an issue. Charity's an issue. I talk about these continuums, but they go on and on and on. Charity. Is it acceptable for me to give money to somebody that I know that may be poor but needs the money? Or will I offend them by doing so? Some of you have heard of people that are very offended. They may be poor, but the idea that you're going to give them money is humiliating to them and unacceptable. That is not true of my children. I haven't found them unwilling to take money in their lives. So I guess I've humiliated them. Okay. Monochronic and polychronic. So on page 9 on page 9 of this. What does that mean? This is a very interesting one. Monochronic is talking about time. Kronos is the god of time. He was the father of Zeus in ancient Greek. Some people do a lot of different things simultaneously, like mothers, like even teachers sometimes. And so they must manage several competing schedules that are going on simultaneously. A lot of people think that if you're late for a meeting, it is a sign of disrespect. But some cultures, it is very common to be late, and it's expected that you will not be there at a certain time. I've had that situation where I was invited to a social party, and I arrived 5 to 10 minutes before the party was official to begin, and the people weren't even ready for the party. They invited you at 7, but they didn't plan to start the party until 8 o'clock. Now, that's not true in some European cultures or in American cultures. They say 7 o'clock, you better be into class at 7 o'clock. If you're supposed to be at a college class at 7 o'clock and you show up at 8, you miss the class. So you have to know the culture, the context. I believe Japan, you must be on time, very critical, you must be on time. In some cultures, in this use of time, personal life is totally polychronic. I have relatives that they'll be on their way to the house to have dinner, but they'll run into somebody and it'll delay them for half an hour because they'll socialize and talk to them. Because not socializing and talking is considered offensive. So they will do that. Now, it also means they are also late, but it means that do you put a greater emphasis on relationships, or do you put a greater emphasis on management of time? That's a big deal. Country people, I think, farmers and such, are not as time-oriented as city people. That's just my observation. You can decide. Now, if you start church just at 9 o'clock in the morning, you probably have to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning. You can't show up at 9:15. It would cause a lot of stir. So this whole attitude, it depends on the situation and what it is you're doing. Now, future orientation, this is a little different. Some people are very focused on the future, but only the near future. What am I going to do in the next 3 years? Am I going to sell my house, buy another house? Am I going to start a business? Am I going to switch jobs? And they don't look 10 years in the future, 20 years. They don't even think about it. I usually don't think about it. Some cultures are Carp Diem, which means they care about the present and they focus all on the present. And that may be because they don't have anything but the present to live for. It takes all of their energy to earn money and to put food on the table and to pay the rent right now. So game planning 5 years from now is not an option. So what does it mean about these cultural values? It means you need to read up on the cultures. I have a number of books that says working with the people from Thailand or working with Arabs. And it talks about their preferences and when they have meetings. And there are all kinds of rules about, in some cultures, if you're an American and you go in that culture, you talk too much and you impose your opinion too much. And they kind of freeze you out and they say, it's not appropriate. This person is too nosy or too busy trying to get involved with everything. Some cultures you have meetings, but it's already decided what the decision is. You're not going to have any impact on it. And our own culture may have that. People set up meetings and they really don't. They're just having the meeting. They're not planning to make a decision there. It's already been made. So that's a very important thing to clarify, even in so-called white culture, American culture. Value orientations don't explain everything. There are other aspects of a culture. Individuals have traumatic experiences or all kinds of experiences that may affect them individually as they function in that culture. They may have no family. They may have a very extensive family. They may be dedicated to their family, and then they'll make sacrifices for their family, especially in their work. The religious beliefs may impact them to be more like us or less like us, depending on what that impact is. People from rural areas act differently than people from city areas. We know that. So even if you're a farmer in Japan, you're different. You may be more like a farmer in the United States, but I can't say that because I don't know farmers in Japan. So those are things that affect us. Now, communication behaviors right at the end. These can make a huge difference, and you really have to study nonverbal behavior especially. I mentioned eye contact. Watching people too much can upset them. How long you look at them, if you happen to look at them and then look away like we normally do, that's not a big issue. If I just stare at some part of somebody's body or something for a long time, or stare at their face, it's considered offensive. It could be I'm casting a spell on them, actually. That could be the evil eye as a concept from thousands of years ago, and it continues. Personal gestures. You must realize that a certain gesture in one society may be an offensive one in another. Voice pitch, how loud do you speak, or do you speak with normal voice potential? I mean, if I'm teaching English second language and I'm yelling all the time, okay, the word is taxi. Now, Bill, how did you call a taxi? And I get really loud and stuff. People might take it as a message. I think they're deaf or they're not very smart. Thought patterns can have a huge issue. I think this one area is very interesting because I've seen explained how some people, when they write about the past, and they don't apply much what they're saying to the present, even though maybe they're writing about some idea of something to apply to the business. But when they write, they're not writing to come up with ideas as much as they're writing just to not make mistakes, to look fluent, but to have nothing to do with the idea. So you have to look at motivation of that individual. So there's a lot to be learned from that. So what I would say in terms of cultural values is you have to study them, and you can take a lot from the culture. It helps teach you what some of these values might be. Is it a culture that values personal relationships? Give an example. In some cultures, the relationship you develop with a client may be part of something that your grandparents may have been worked with their grandparents in terms of business. And so it's a very long-standing relationship. And if you were to come in as an outsider and say, look, let's talk about a business deal to save you money. And then I bring out everything, and I don't spend any time getting to know you at all. I just start talking business only. That's a sign that you don't understand the culture, because unless you're willing to spend the time to understand their family and to share ideas and stories and things like this, they're not going to trust you to do business. That's a very common mistake people make. They immediately start talking business when they should be talking essentially social things. And in that case, I guess Americans would move too fast. They want you to sign a deal. Let's make a deal. Hey, come on, let's do it. Like Trump, And then people don't like that. They don't like to be rushed. They don't like to have people pressure them. And so it usually leads to a negative in terms of the relationship. Okay, well, I just wanted to hit you with some of those ideas. And in reflecting on this, I think even states like Iowa and Nebraska and Kansas, you may detect differences between people as they cross over the border to visit you or you go to visit them. This stuff fascinates me more than the international, because there are differences in our own culture. And think about Coloradans and how they think about the outdoors as opposed to Nebraskans. Maybe Nebraskans don't like mountains as much. They prefer to go camping and fishing on a lake somewhere not too far away from home, not too expensive. And others would say, well, look, if I'm going to leave, I'm going to go to Las Vegas and we're going to gamble. I mean, that's the concept of vacations is very different. Farms have huge differences, I mean, I guess I don't say all farmers are like, because some of them are different. Some are organic farmers, most of them aren't. Farmers are very independent, but sometimes they aren't, you know. So when you write about your own little culture on here, your own town, whatever, little or big, think about what the rules are. Think about what, you know, what do most people do? What is the common practice? And then you can kind of think, do you fit into that? So I've never fit into being a farmer. Didn't want to be a farmer. I fit into more being a, a play or movie critic, or somebody who likes to write short articles on things. I always thought I felt like I would be more normal living in New York City than living in anywhere in the Midwest, um, because I wanted things to move faster, and most people, they don't move very fast, pretty slow. Okay, well, I gotta take a break. I've worked all afternoon, so I hope this is giving you some positives, and we're going to do a reading next week. If you happen to notice, the second week of the syllabus, the second half of the lessons is from the next week. And I got to go through and correct that. I may put the syllabus back on, but I made a mistake when I was editing. I left some stuff on. So third week is not taking place till the third week. So what I put on the announcements for you is the official information. And I will put up the discussion probably later tonight. So you shouldn't be working on discussion until at least tomorrow, anyhow. All right, you should have your books by next week. So I think that would be helpful. Thank you.